Last few weeks have kind of been a bit grim for the Winnipeg Jets, but at the end of every tunnel, there is always a light. I think.
You're Locked On the Hockey Jets, your daily podcast on the Winnipeg Jets, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hey friends, and welcome to tonight's episode of Locked On Winnipeg Jets, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. I'm your host, Harrison Lee, an avid Winnipeg Jets fan and an online blogger. You can follow me on Twitter at HLLivingLoco and at LO_Winnipeg Jets. Thanks for making Locked On Jets your first listen of the day every day. If you enjoy what you're hearing, be sure to like, follow, and subscribe on all of your favorite podcasting platforms and YouTube. Doing so, of course, is always free of charge and ensures you never miss another episode. Most of all, though, we just love and appreciate your support. Tonight's episode, we are chatting about, a road trip that I think the Jets would probably like to pretend just did not happen. The last several games have been, a little eye-opening. I think Winnipeg would, certainly like to do things a little differently. The outcomes haven't been great. And in their last 9 games, the Jets are 3-6. And not every game has been bad, necessarily. I think, there were some games in there where the Jets maybe lost a close decision, but, there were a couple of breakdowns or something that didn't quite bounce their way, and things kind of ended up sort of spiraling from there. But the end result is the same. The Jets are in the first real slump of the season, and, it comes right at the end of a tail end of a very long road trip. Winnipeg is finally about to get some home games, but should we be concerned about it? We'll chat about that in just a quick moment, but before we go any further, just wanted to let you know that tonight's episode is brought to you by Gametime. Download the Gametime app, create an account, and be sure to use promo code LOCKEDONNHL for $20 off your first purchase. Now, like I said, the last few games for the Jets have been a little bit on the puzzling side. Winnipeg has shown some decent moments, some defensive structure at times, and they've also shown some decent chance creation, but for the most it's pretty fair to say that the Jets have been getting outplayed. The last game that Winnipeg played against Dallas was close. The Jets lost like 3 or 4-1. But, honestly, they just weren't really able to create the same level of danger and opportunity against Dallas that they were conceding. The Stars, I thought, had better high-danger chance creation. I thought that they were really pesky, and eventually the Jets did slow the Stars down, but it wasn't really enough. Dallas ended up taking the lead late. The Jets couldn't get more than one goal, and it just seems like no matter what the Jets do, the last few games it's been uphill sledding, right? They'll have strong stretches, but then they have a defensive breakdown, they miss a good opportunity, and just like that, it ends up in the back of the net. This is sort of what used to happen to them in years past. I guess this is one of those times where, the Jets are thrilled to have built a really nice margin near the top of the league. They're no longer in first. Minnesota has taken over that spot, but being first in the league at this point doesn't really matter too much. It's really where you finish the year. And I think the Jets are in a pretty good spot to still be fighting for a President's Trophy towards the end of the year. But I think for the past couple of games, we've seen that Winnipeg is vulnerable. The first domino to fall really was Samberg going down. And since then, even with Samberg healthy, it wasn't like this team was firing on all 4 cylinders. Without him, though, it's just been really, really rough. The Jets right now are still going with Fleury and Pionk as their second pairing, which, I know Fleury is doing his best, but he's not Samberg when it comes to being that sort of anchoring partner that Pionk frankly needs to really thrive. Neil has done, a good job offensively this year, but we know that when he's away from a really strong defensive presence, the vulnerabilities in his game start to be picked apart by really skilled players. And so it's a tough thing, right? You give some, you get some. I think for the most part, though, the Jets have generally benefited from, some good puck fortune, great power play, pretty balanced, even strength scoring. Stuff is starting to come a little bit harder, though. Goals are more at a premium. Ehlers went down in the Vegas game and was unfortunately, having to miss the Stars game. Honestly, even if he was healthy enough to play on Sunday, I might have considered not having him go just because I think it's more important for him to heal up. Winnipeg, again, has built itself a very nice margin at the top of the league. In order for them to really be at their best later, it's probably not a bad thing to maybe have a couple of games off for some guys, let them heal up and rest. It's why I've advocated for Scheifele to do the same. But, for all of the recent struggles, the good news is this was always going to be the most brutal stretch of the season. For some reason, the Jets really pissed somebody off at the scheduling making office because they've had like a billion games on the road, almost nothing at home. And I don't even understand why the Jets had to do all of this. I know people were saying, oh, but the Jets haven't had that many back-to-backs. And sure, that's true, but they've also had like a million games on the road. If you look at their last couple of weeks, they've had, like 9 or 10 games, actually 11. I think something like 10 or 11 games on the road, which is pretty crazy, right? Only one break in between against the Panthers. And sure, they did have a couple of games at home before this stretch early in November. But since then, it's just been a really extended road streak, one of the longest road trips of the year. And it was all through, for the most part, pretty good playoff teams, right? Minnesota, the Stars, Vegas, the Panthers. The Kings are surprisingly decent this year, and they kind of put the Jets under the real cosh. But 3-6, it's okay. But I think the Jets kind of got shown that there's still, a lot of room for improvement. I think they were more like 4-6 if you included the Rangers game. But on the whole, right, I think the Jets kind of got, I don't want to say little broed, but kind of a little broed. Winnipeg, they're a good team. But I think, in terms of the depth, in terms of some of the key cogs that they really can't afford to lose, it shows you that there's some fragility to this team. Winnipeg, again, has, a lot of pieces that are working really well this year. But in a couple of key areas, like the top line going quiet again, the Nemesnikov line being a little bit up and down, especially when Ehlers is there, it's been hard for the Winnipeg to find some sort of offensive rhythm outside of the depth lines. Like Lowry's line and the Kupari line have both been doing a really good job. But other than that, offensively at 5v5, the Jets have had a bit of a mixed bag. If they face a really aggressive forecheck that can counter quickly like they've been through most of this road trip, Winnipeg is in real trouble. The top line has been shut down for most of this road trip. I know that Scheifele is dealing with an injury, but it's not just him. Connor has not had the same level of offensive threat that he's had in the past. And I don't necessarily think it's on an effort thing. I just think that when you have Scheifele struggling, you've got Velarde struggling a bit, Connor's not going to be able to do everything by himself. He's still got to have some support. And I think that this is where, the top line has just been disjointed. They've been close on some plays, and I think that they've gotten a couple of good looks, but for the most part, they're just getting outskated. And at some point, the Jets need to do something about that because I don't think that line in the playoffs is going to do super well. The Nemesnikov line, it is what it is. I think the Jets know that the 2C role is probably a bit of a sore spot. Vlad has really been going through it the last few weeks. And now that Ehlers is out, at least for yesterday's game, he might be back later this week. It's just it's a little painful, but the good news is Iafallo, Perfetti, and Nemesnikov did have some good shifts together. So, there may be some other ways that you can use Ehlers, but overall, I think that this run is just disappointing for the Jets. Winnipeg probably felt like they deserved a little bit better, but in some ways, I think the record was a little bit more reflective of what I expected from the Jets this season, but still a bit harsh. All that said, after all of that, the Jets are finally going to get some games at home in December, and it's about dang time, right? Winnipeg has been on the road for forever, and finally they'll have a few more visits to Canada Life Center. So I want to chat about that and what it's going to take for the Jets to maybe right the ship a bit over the next couple of weeks. It's still plenty of time. It's very early in the season, and I'd much rather all of this stuff happen now so that it sets you up for a more successful second half. I guess the good news is if you collapse now, you can't have your second half collapse like Jets fans are always afraid of, but I don't think that that's what's happening. I think some things have maybe not been going so well, but it's all very fixable. We'll chat about what I want Arniel to do over the next few weeks in just a little bit. But before we go too much further, thought I would shout out our friends and partners at FanDuel. Get ready to tackle the NFL action with FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook. Right now, new customers can bet $5 and get $150 in bonus bets if you win. The FanDuel Sportsbook app gives you everything you need to place live bets on the NFL all in one place. If you're watching games like Ravens versus Eagles, or maybe you saw the Bills game the other night against the Niners, wow, Josh Allen doing what he did on that crazy almost pitch and run. Gosh, what a play that was. I guess you could call it like a back pass or something. It was a crazy sequence. Maybe you're seeing that and you're getting a hunch in the middle of the game and you think you already know who's going to win. Well, you can also check out the latest stats, view live play-by-play, and so much more on the same page where you're placing your bets. All you have to do is visit FanDuel.com to join the day and get started. Again, you'll get $150 in bonus bets if your first $5 bet wins. That's all at FanDuel.com. Never waste a hunch and make every moment more with FanDuel, an official sportsbook partner of the NFL. While we're here, I also wanted to let you know about our friends and partners at Gametime, and you heard me talk about them a little bit earlier this episode. Obviously, Gametime is super great because they offer you a fast, convenient, and secure place to buy tickets. Now, a lot of you have probably bought tickets to concerts or sporting events, and you're used to getting hit with lots of surprise fees. Nobody likes that. Nobody wants that. Gametime doesn't either. All you have to do is toggle a feature called All-In Pricing that shows you what you're paying for up front. There's no hidden secrets, no hidden charges, and you'll know exactly what you're paying for even before you get to checkout. And of course, Gametime wants to save you even more time and money by offering you a brand new feature called Gametime Picks, which filters out all the fluff to show you only incredible deals on great seats. And it all comes back with their lowest price guarantee, event cancellation protection, and so much more. They even show you seat views before you buy so you know what you're buying into rather than buying blindly. Take the guesswork out of buying tickets with Gametime. Download the Gametime app, create an account, and be sure to use promo code LOCKEDONNHL for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. Again, create an account and redeem code LOCKEDONNHL for $20 off. Download Gametime today. What time is it? Gametime. Hey friends, welcome back to this episode of Locked On Winnipeg Jets, part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Your team every day. Everydayers, thank you so much for rejoining us on tonight's episode as we're just chatting a little bit about Winnipeg's recent streak and run of form. It's been a little bit rough around the edges, to put it lightly. I think we all know that the Jets can frankly be better. I think the team itself would say that. And look, the schedule makers really did the Jets no favors. Almost an entire run of like 10 or 11 games on the road with only one break in between. It was bound to cause some issues for the Jets. But I think for Winnipeg, they'll still be disappointed because I think that in some of these games, the effort and motivation has been there, but it's just not been easy to get past, dead legs, a sluggish feeling, and teams that have really aggressively pressured them and forced them into lots of mistakes. All of that's kind of led to a recent run where they're 4-6 in their last 10 games, 3-6 in their last 9. Not been a fun road trip. A 3-game losing streak, which is the first of the season. A lot of other teams have already had this, so it's not like the Jets should really feel too bad about this. This being their first 3-game losing streak of the year, I think it's, a pretty fair reflection of the fact that the Jets have built themselves a wonderful margin at the top. Even the Stars who beat them on Sunday and do have 2 games in hand still trail the team by 6 points. So the losing streak hasn't really had that much of an impact. Sure, they're not first in the division or the league anymore. Minnesota's up there, but again, who really cares at this point? Winnipeg is likely to get back into that spot here pretty soon, and I don't worry about it so much. I care more in the second half of the season where the Jets are located. Obviously being in first or whatever is great right now, but it's still, 25 games into the season. The Jets have much bigger fish to fry, and the season is very long. So right now, I think it's really important for the Jets to work around some of these lineup issues. You heard me talk a little bit ago about the top line and really the skill lines in general just not working out the way that they're supposed to. And I think this is where it's time to make some changes. Now, I know that the Jets are really married to, Connor and Scheifele playing together. And if you're so hell-bent on doing that, then at least get Ehlers up there. I know that people are like, well, why would you put Ehlers up there? He's defensively a little bit questionable. He'll make some bad passes. He has some plays where it's kind of like, yeah, it's not great on the defensive reads, but the biggest thing for Ehlers is that he helps the transition game, right? He gets the puck up the ice. He'll find Scheifele and Connor with some great passes. And it just seems like when they're actually playing together, even on the power play or at even strength, when they have that rare shift where they just happen to all be at the, be on the ice at the same time, there's some real chemistry, and it's shown from other years where that trio has generally been more good than bad. Is it the most ideal arrangement? No. But I think given what we're working with and some of the internal constraints, especially with Scheifele not necessarily wanting to play apart from Connor, but also having issues wanting to play with Ehlers, this is probably as close to a compromise as you get. And for what it's worth, I think it's a fine line. It's not going to be a great top line, but it's going to be better than what we've got with Connor, Scheifele, and Vilardi. And this is not to say that Vilardi is some problem. I just don't think that the chemistry and the way that line works, especially with the lack of foot speed with Scheifele and Vilardi, is really doing it any favors, especially when they're facing other opponents' top lines. That's where the Jets really lose these matchup battles, and it's made it a lot harder for Winnipeg's skill lines to get going. So adding some speed up there, I think, is really critical. Ehlers is probably one of the only ones that I think can immediately help them, unless the Jets bring in somebody from trade. I think it's a little early for them to be doing that. I'm still kind of the mind that they're going to want to hold out until they get closer to the trade deadline and see what shakes out. I did have some interest in Nils Höglander. Apparently, he's being shopped around a bit by the Canucks, and I know that people will look at his scoring record and say, why would you be interested? Well, Höglander's probably played like fourth to third line minutes the past couple of years. He's had multiple seasons where he's either scored 30 plus points or, kind of paced to have 30 points if he'd played a full season. So for me, I think that there's a lot of intrigue there. I've watched him, on and off the last several years. He's fast, he's elusive, he's skilled, and I think in a more prime role here that he'd probably have with the Jets, I think there's a real chance that he could explode and become almost like a Niederreiter-esque presence. The nice thing with Höglander is that he's also got 3 years after the season at just around $3 million per year, which is really, really inexpensive. And if you're going to take a gamble on a player who probably wouldn't cost you a lot to bring in and is also 24 years old, you could do a lot worse than Höglander. I totally get why the Jets probably won't do it, and I wouldn't be shocked if they're not even interested, but he is the kind of gamble that I think Winnipeg wouldn't be unwise to consider. All that said, they're probably not going to trade for a guy who's like 5'9" and who, this year has not exactly been lighting the lamp on fire, but I kind of think the previous years might be a better indicator of a guy who's looking to be a really intriguing middle six option with some real upside. So stuff to think about. But for the Jets, in terms of like their other lines, I think you can keep Perfetti, Nemestikov, and Iafallo together. They've been fine. Where that leaves Vilardi is probably a little bit trickier. I'd like to see Niederreiter, Lowry, and Vilardi play together, though. I think that there's a lot of congruency in the way that they approach the offensive zone. I think Vilardi would add an extra layer of deft finishing touch that Appleton just doesn't have. And for Appleton, I think if you play him alongside Kupari and Barron, I think he would really thrive there. That could be a really good forechecking line. Appleton would bring a considerable amount of skill and versatility to the fourth line. And I think, given what he's already done alongside Lowry, if he gets to a speedster like Kupari, he might be able to help that line a little bit offensively. I wouldn't say that I'd expect a lot of extra finishing, but I think it might be a little bit more effective than Iafallo, who, Iafallo is more suited to that defensive presence kind of stuff. He's a really good PKer. Offensively, maybe not as ideal. And I know you're probably saying, well, then why would you play him with Perfetti and Nemestikov? It just seems like that trio, for one reason or another, really works well. Defensively, they're strong. Offensively, they seem to get some good forechecking opportunities. And I think Perfetti can kind of be the trigger man there. But the biggest thing is that it just seems like they have chemistry. It's not like Iafallo doesn't do well with the fourth line, but if you get Appleton maybe in his spot alongside Kupari, it might be able to get a little more of a finishing touch. Appleton's got a pretty decent shot. He's used it a fair bit this year, and given his production along Lowry, I could see him doing a pretty serviceable job on the fourth line. On the defense, that's where I probably have even bigger questions. Absent Sandberg, it's going to be really rough, and I don't think that there's any way around it. You do notice that the third talking point is about Logan Stanley. We're going to have that conversation again. It is one of those things where the Stanley question is really upsetting the balance for a lot of things with the Jets, but I want to save more time for that because it's a bigger conversation about how the Jets handle some of their defensive prospects. But for Winnipeg's blue line, I think the biggest thing is just trying to figure out some way to get Heinola into your second pairing. Pionk with Fleury is not going super well. I know he scored in the last game, but that was after giving up loads of opportunities to the offense in previous shifts. So it did kind of help to balance out some of the defensive lapses and whatnot, but not enough to where it was really worth the sacrifice. Pionk and Fleury together are just bad, and it gets really bad when you have any combination of Stanley and somebody else on your third pairing, because it's not like the top D pairing with Morrissey and DeMello was doing all that well either. They've had some stronger games, but for the most part, this Jets defense has really been Sandberg, Pionk, and then everyone else kind of filling in after that. Winnipeg's blue line is probably more fragile than it's been in some time, and with both Fleury and Stanley playing in the lineup in prime roles, it's kind of felt at times like the Morrow, Beaulieu, Sherratt days, and that's probably not a memory that I need to have. If there's a nostalgia I could do without, it's that particular defensive arrangement. So the Jets have some really tough questions. The good news is the goaltending, they really have no worries about. Hellebuck and Comrie have both been really good, and that's all you really need to say about that. It's just the rest of the team that's probably got some work to do and some bigger questions to answer. But you're not going to solve everything on a really brutal road trip that has put the Jets in a tough spot. And we'll chat about, some of the tough spots Winnipeg has also put itself in just a quick moment. Before we go too much further, though, did want to let you know about our friends and partners at PrizePicks. PrizePicks is the best place to get real money sports action. With over 10 million members and billions of dollars in awarded winnings, PrizePicks has made daily fantasy sports available to everyone. You just pick more or less on at least 2 players for a shot to win up to 100 times your cash. If you're wondering why PrizePicks should be your number one choice for fantasy sports, they always put their members first, so all withdrawals are fast, safe, and secure. When your picks hit, you can get your money in as little as 15 minutes. And they even offer Venmo for quick and easy deposits and withdrawals to your account. And of course, if you have an injury to your lineup will still stay active, and you can still cash out if your lineup isn't perfect. As long as you hit as little as 4 correct picks, you could win 100 times your cash. And when you sign up today, you'll get $50 instantly when you play $5. You don't even need to win to get that $50 bonus. It's just guaranteed. If you think that, say the Jets top line will have more than 1.5 assists this coming week, that could be a really good gamble. Maybe more than 1 goal this week. Also something to consider. The Jets top line's been pretty quiet recently, but maybe this is their breakout week. And the only way that you can get in on that action is by downloading the app today and using code LOCKEDONNHL to get $50 instantly after you play your first $5 lineup. Again, download the app today and use code LOCKEDONNHL to get $50 instantly after you play your first $5 lineup. PrizePicks. Run your game. Hey friends, and welcome back to this episode of Locked On Winnipeg Jets, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Every day, thank you so much for rejoining us on tonight's episode as we are chatting a little bit about, some interesting questions and things with the Jets recently. Obviously, the past week has been really bad for Winnipeg, but not super shocking that Winnipeg has struggled. It's been a really, really, really tough couple of games on the road. Winnipeg has definitely shown some gaps. And it is what it is, right? I don't think it's like the worst thing ever. I think the Jets facing adversity is probably a helpful thing more than anything. If you consistently just win all the time, sometimes that can get you into some bad habits and maybe make you think that you're a little bit better than you really are. So having this happen now after the Jets have already built a sizable lead at the top of the league really doesn't hurt too much. I think if anything, it's probably helpful to remind Winnipeg that there's a higher level of play that they can reach, and that, for as good as they are, there is still more that they can do towards, the midway or even latter stages of the season. And again, given how good their record already is, it's not like this stretch has really hurt them all that much. I think it's been instructive. I think it's helpful to have adversity now rather than later in the back half of the year where everything's falling apart and Winnipeg just can't even get anything going. I think it's not going to be that situation after the turn of the year. But I think for the Jets, one of the biggest things that's still kind of holding them back is the fact that they keep trying to make Logan Stanley a thing. I know that other coaches have looked at Stanley and they've really tried to turn all 6, 7 of him into a shutdown player. I just don't think that Stanley is ever going to be that guy. He's shown, some decent stretch passing, and he's also had, some shifts where he'll actually carry the puck pretty nicely. But the problem with the rest of his game is that when you look at his defensive awareness, the lack of agility, and more recently, the consistent penalties that he's taking, it's really upsetting the balance of whatever good he's doing out there. The penalty thing is especially frustrating because he takes like 2 to 3 penalties a game. It's not even like I'm exaggerating. He's averaging among the highest rate of penalties per skater for the Jets. I mean, it's crazy. He's like easily our worst defender when it comes to minor infractions. And for a team that, doesn't really want to put the PK under this much stress constantly, I think it's probably worth pointing out that in like the 10 minutes a night Stanley's playing, he spends a ton of it inside the penalty box. I mean, it's crazy that, that hasn't really cost him all that much in terms of ice time. I will say that Arniel firmly benched him in the third period last night. I think that there was a point at which his value was definitely exceeded with the negative stuff that he was doing. Unfortunately, I just think Stanley is what he's going to be at this stage of his career. He's a guy who makes sense as maybe like a 7th or 8th defender, but if you're asking him to start regularly, you've got problems. In most of these games, he's had some really big mistakes. He's really not been able to kill penalties. And, aside from taking his own penalties, he's not really contributing much either at even strength or on the PKs. So I just don't really see why the Jets are still trying to make this happen. I know that there's probably some degree of sunk cost fallacy. I'm sure Arniel is trying to figure out a way to make them work, but at some point the Jets are going to have to cut bait. Heinola has been like log jammed for years, and when he finally had a real look at a spot, again, injuries have been a real issue and have set him back. But now there's really no excuse for him not to be playing. I don't even think he looked bad in most of his recent games. He had 2 appearances so far. And generally, I thought, aside from a couple of nervous moments, he looked fine. I mean, he made some good breakout passes, some clean exits. It's exactly what I wanted him to do. I didn't need him to do anything fancy or some of the more creative stuff that I think he'll get confident in doing as he gets more ice time. But, at the bare minimum, just be a stable defensive partner for Miller. And he was that. That pairing seemed to do pretty okay. And so I just don't understand why the Jets keep trying to make, Stanley happen, even though they probably do know that at this point there's not much you can do. And I think a lot of people are looking at Arniel's comments after the game yesterday about him saying that we have to get Stanley into the top 6 and all that and thinking that he's not getting benched. I don't think Arniel's quite as married to Stanley as it might sound. I think he's just trying to defend his guy. He's going to try and stick up for his players. He's going to try and take that blame on himself. And I think for Logan, I'm sure Stanley is frustrated as much as anyone. He wants to contribute. He is trying his best, but it's just not really working. And I think at some point, the Jets just need to admit that they made a mistake. The draft pick has always been a bit of a specter over this franchise, and no matter who's coached this team, Stanley's performance has generally been the same. He always, lays 100% out there. There's no question about the effort, but the performance and the impact, it's just not happening. At some point, the Jets are going to really have to sit down and assess whether or not he fits into their future plans. And at this point, I just don't see how it makes sense for the Jets to continue on. I know that they're paying him a fair bit, but at this point, it's better if Heinola starts getting those minutes. I think Billy is capable of more than what Stanley can bring, and at worst, he probably can't be, that much worse off than what Stanley's already doing. So, you might as well see what you've got in Billy. What do you have to lose at this point? The Jets are already in a tough spot. The defense has not been great recently. Might as well see if maybe Heinola can kind of recoup and recall some of that former form of his when he was in the AHL and, in Finland. And maybe he can even be that stabilizing partner for Pionk like he was in limited minutes last year. But all the same, it is what it is. We'll see if Winnipeg agrees with me here in tomorrow's game against the Blues. I'm hoping that they make the change. I think even if it doesn't happen tomorrow, it'll happen at some point this week. It's just going to, probably take a little bit of push and pull, but we'll see soon enough. Let me know what you think about all of this, and if you think Heinola should come back in for Stanley, drop your thoughts in the comments below or at my social medias at HLLivingLoco and at LO_Winnipeg Jets. For tonight's episode, though, that's going to be all the time that we have. Thank you so much for listening and making Locked On Jets your first listen of the day every day. We'll see you back here tomorrow with coverage of Winnipeg versus St. Louis, and hopefully we get to talk about a wonderful victory. But for tonight's show, all the time that we have, thank you so much. Have a great night, and as always, go Jets go.